Good afternoon and welcome to BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. It's the 4th of December, and our guest today, as always on a Monday, is Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming to us out of Singapore. Vishnu, as always, great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. As always, it's my pleasure to be here. A great way to start the week.
Now, Vishnu, for a start, over the weekend, we had less hawkish tone out of Jerome Powell's speech than markets were expecting. What has been the reaction and what is the expectation moving forward?
I mean, that's a fair question, right? And markets have really pushed as far as they can with this whole less hawkish than expected Fed.
Sorry, Vishnu, your internet connection is not good today.
With softer US inflation data. We also had softer US activity. And markets have really run with this, especially after two of the more hawkish Fed members. They are Fed's Waller and Mester. They both came out to say, look, we can pause and assess. And that's for December. And Waller even indicated rate cuts next year. So markets got a bit carried away. But if you take a step back, the reality check here is the Fed had indicated for the longest time that next year rate cuts are on the table. The dot plot back in September already said that. And the pause to assess is nothing new. It's nothing sexy because the Fed had said, look, we are going to be data dependent from here. And in fact, Jerome Powell on many occasions had said, we will be careful from here. Be a surprise to anyone. In fact, now that markets have swung so much on that Fed, the pivot bet, our sense is
Vishnu,
that you're aware that because US Treasury yields had fallen so much, they've fallen more than they had risen. So yields rose sharply, and the Fed pulled back. And now yields have fallen between the November meeting and now yields have fallen more. And so yields are even softer than they were in September. And that means that the Fed will not be unnecessarily dovish because they are mindful of financial conditions being somewhat easier at this stage. So that's something we need to be mindful of in terms of thinking about the Fed risks. So on that note, I want to say how much further yields can drop, I think will be limited. How much further the dollar can drop as the corollary, that will be limited. And how much the risk currencies want to rally could also be limited. And let's bear in mind there are other risk factors coming in. Should also have risks re-entering the picture. So these are perhaps things to be mindful
of. Vishnu, your internet today is not very good. We miss quite a few chunks of what you've said. But looking ahead then, we had underwhelming production cuts at OPEC, and oil prices have dropped below $80 a barrel. What's the sense on your view on the oil prices in the near future?
Well, I think risks to oil will remain. So the way I want to frame this is we've got two legs of this. The first leg is probably going to be further downside, albeit more measured, because OPEC will continue to next year going into the middle of the year. That could be sharper downside if it coincides with a sharper pullback in global demand. Minor stimulus expectations will build up as we are entering into the end of the year because of the Chinese policy meeting. And so downwardly biased, the way I want to frame it is two big factors. One is non-OPEC output will offset the OPEC cuts. That's one. Second is as long as geopolitics doesn't spin out of control to become a real impediment to production and passage of oil, the downside risks will remain. And finally, I think the downside risks in the global economic picture, they will also start to temper how much higher oil prices can go, especially going into triple digits, so on and so forth. So Oil would be on a fairly softening path, but let's remain mindful of the fact that it is very difficult to call on geopolitics and tail risks. So that tendency for oil, we cannot take away the geopolitical tail risk premium.
Now, Vishnu, unfortunately, we're going to cut today's session short because of your internet connection. Thank you very much for your insights and thank you for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We've been speaking to Vishnu Varathan, Head of Economics and Strategy at Mizuho Bank, coming to us out of Singapore. This has been BizTech's Asian Midday Market Watch. I'm Brian Fernandez. Check out this interview on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.